welcome back to this week's edition of the Research Corner. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Joe Antoshak. Joe, how's it going?
It's going well. How you doing, T-Bird? Good morning.
I can't complain. Overall, getting back into the groove of things. Obviously we've had some disruptions over the past week with, last week we had 4th of July, then, various vacations and the like, but starting to get in to see some interesting data that's coming out. I know last week we got the Logistics Managers Index. I know Zach and Anthony love having Dr. Zach Rogers on there to talk the LMI. But I was like, you know what? We like talking the LMI as well. So we'll pull up our first chart here, and we see overall we are down to 45.6, the lowest reading we've been at any point in the last 5 years, into that contraction phase. It is the fourth straight record low for the data set. So, we are in this contraction phase from a transportation overall. I don't think that's a surprise when you dig into what we see within Sonar. But, Joe, you look at this acceleration almost downward. It's still relatively concerning, at least in the current environment. You start to see, we'll touch on it here in a minute, but the 12-month outlook, a little better than where we are currently.
Yeah, I think it's really an indication of sort of an advancing stage of this down cycle, right? And basically what we do on this segment is try to parse through all the data, figure out where exactly in these cycles we are. And I think we're kind of approaching a point where it's like, people are starting to think like, maybe it can't really get worse than this, or at least that's my impression of it. So there's no clear indication as to when things are going to turn around, at least nothing all that specific. But it does sort of feel like, I don't know if there's if the floor goes lower,
Yeah, it's one of those times where the market is just in this. It's come so down so far that it is hard to believe it could go lower, I think is a lot of it. But I think there's potential for headwinds, obviously in the back half of the year, but talking 1 year out, how does that change, right? You start looking 12 months when people are hopefully coming back to spending, if there's a disruption around student loans and the like. Hopefully it's like a shorter term until people are able to rebalance budgets, their own personal budgets and the like. So, we'll move to in the next chart, looking kind of at the subcomponents. I think one of these areas is looking at inventory levels. Again, you see it in contraction. I put it on here with our inbound ocean TEU volume index because inside the report, it said seasonality that would have suggested that the inventory level index or the subcomponent would have increased soon, but there's some signals that it might not happen, pointing to Chinese softness in production, back to school. Now, granted, I look at this, we've seen a little bit of an increase in that inbound ocean TEU volume index. It's hard to call it a trend. It's hard to call it anything sustainable or a recovery, but there has been a little bit of upward movement. We were on a call yesterday, Joe, and we kind of heard from a customer that, hey, inventory levels across the board are kind of back down to where they were, and people are comfortable. Back down to where they were like throughout COVID, right? But they're comfortable, and they're not willing or not having to go out and restock maybe near as fast as what they would have in the past. When you look at this, does it lend any positivity or positive outlook for you?
Yeah, the unknowns, right? And right, you mentioned this call yesterday, and I think the concern, inventory levels contracting a bit, right? That's a good thing. Like that's it. We're stepping toward a more normalized environment, right? Where like inventory isn't just stacking up as demand drops. But what is a bit concerning, and I believe this was said on the call too, where it's like, shippers are not looking to produce, right? Like they're not looking to replenish the inventory because they just think that, right, the boom time is gone. And so if right, that production side of things really does stay down, and then you have this student loan headwind that further dampens goods demand. These are going to be concerning things moving forward, right? And right, you mentioned student loans earlier. Hopefully, people are thinking now, like hopefully they're rebalancing their budgets at this point before they come back online. Because if not, yeah, I mean they're going to be in for a pretty difficult awakening, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely that'll be a trying time, at least from the consumer perspective, right? We've talked about it from a freight perspective for a while now, how challenging it's been. Well, now you're throwing in a headwind to a consumer that's already combating very difficult macroeconomic conditions. It makes it more difficult. We'll pull up one more chart here real quick. Looking at the LMI, the transportation capacity, still in that expansion territory, which is kind of interesting because you wouldn't have expected this to continue to grow. And like the exits that you would have expected haven't necessarily materialized. And I think it's evident when you look at rejection rates, right at 3%? I mean, doesn't seem like capacity is leaving the market in any significant manner.
Yeah, it's wild that is still the case. I would have expected to see a bit of a change there, but what are you going to do? I do want to very quickly plug Freight Tech nominations are open. If you're out there, you want to nominate a company that you think is really crushing it in the freight technology space, just Google Freight Tech 2024. You'll find it. Nominate that company.
Yeah, so get in those Freight Tech nominations for that Freight Tech 100. Obviously, Freight Tech 25 voted on by those industry professionals. So take advantage, get those nominations in now before those close. Joe, thank you so much for joining me